All right, Nate wants to say hi to you. His name's Nathan. He loves the Eagles.
Oh, okay.
All right, Nate. Have a conversation.
And I'm Nathan too, so.
He's Nathan too. So, yeah, I guess the conclusion of the conversation, I think that we're both on agreement here, is that you don't have the right to tell somebody what to do on property that you don't own.
Right.
If you own the property, and if everyone in a string of collective houses owns properties, then those people would have the right to do what they want on that property.
Yes.
But as far as nation borders where there's pieces of land that nobody owns, then nobody has the right to tell those people they can and cannot come on and off those pieces of land that are unowned by anybody or that are common
they're
pathways.
Technically public lands. Technically, they're considered public land, and the public land belonging to the community of citizenry or whatever you want to, the people.
Right, the commons.
Mm-hmm.
People have the right to be on the commons.
Yes.
No matter where they're from.
Right. But again, the nuance is that it's not necessarily right now, okay, just to let the floodgates open because of lots of other issues that we've got going on.
Definitely. The very first thing that needs to happen is we need to abolish government on the whole.
Yeah. Or at least reverse the flow. Where actually I would say even before that is that the people need to become responsible enough to self-govern so that the government has to start serving them and decentralize. It all needs to go back to the power of the people in decentralization. But decentralization is the key, but it can't decentralize to a bunch of people who don't even know they're sovereign or misunderstand sovereignty or are irresponsible, to the nth degree. Because irresponsible people have a tendency to try to obviously lord over other people or are lorded over. Once they become responsible enough to self-govern, then the government has to, by necessity, stop governing them.
I think this is where we stand in disagreement right now on that point there, where I don't agree that it's my right or my responsibility to govern anyone because they don't have the know-with-all within themselves to govern themselves.
So I'm not saying that you should govern them, and I'm not saying I should govern them. They're just inviting in people to govern them because they're part of that dominance hierarchy still because they won't be responsible enough to govern themselves.
Right, and they are unknowingly having their consent violated.
Yes, but they're consenting to that through their ignorance, which is they're ignoring thinking, they're ignoring reflecting, they're ignoring, the responsibility. They don't want the responsibility of what, they want to be entertained. Entertain me. Don't make me be responsible. Just entertain me.
I think I can bring this back to the captor situation where the person, he's kidnapped you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, this person who's violated your consent, you've been with him ever since you were a baby, and you can't speak a lick of English. To say that it's the captor's or the person who's captive's fault for being ignorant, or they need to understand that they've been taken captive before they can become set free, and the idea that that this somehow is morally acceptable because they don't understand that they're captive, or somehow they consent to this through not understanding that they don't consent to it, right? They think it's become their norm, therefore they consent to it. I think is the same thing where
and you have Stockholm syndrome.
You have, right, and people are in public schools where they're getting indoctrinated very strongly throughout their whole entire lives. Then they have the corporate media that they sit in front of, or they have the corporate video games that they sit in front of, and their brains are just completely programmed into a certain way. And to say that, well, it's morally acceptable for somebody to violate their consent because they don't understand better, because they've been,
I'm not saying it's morally
violated.
I'm not saying it's morally acceptable. It's they're in an immoral system, and they need to come out of that. I'm coming out of the immoral system through educating myself and through retraining my mind and unschooling myself. Education and unschooling has been very, very, and working through things and being a reflective human being has helped me come out of it. But I was just as indoctrinated as everybody else. I joined the military. I did,
Right. You were just as indoctrinated as everybody else, and there was people that were violating their rights.
Mm-hmm. But I unknowingly consented to that because I was ignorant.
Right, but that's not consent. That's not true consent. It's like if I were to have sex with somebody who had AIDS and they didn't tell me they had AIDS, that's not true consent.
Right. Well, okay, but let's look at it this way.
Involved
You have like liberals now, or what passes for liberals now on the left, begging to take away everybody else's guns. They're literally like, I'm going to raise my child in this weird progressive manner. I'm going to gaslight them so that they don't even know what gender they are. And they're going to be confused about their gender because it's all for social progress. What they are doing is they are literally begging. I mean, they're reinforcing and begging for slavery. That is they were indoctrinated, and they're continuing to be indoctrinated, and they're continuing to attack anybody that tries to tell them differently. But this is where the allegory of the cave comes in from Plato's Republic, the Republic. He talks about the cave where there was a guy in the cave who comes out, and then he's like, oh, wow, there's this world that has color, and it's not dark, and there's all these vivid tastes and smells and everything else. And then he goes back into the cave and tries to tell them what it's like out there, and they get really angry at him, and they beat him. But then he uses Socratic dialogue instead. This is where Plato's teacher Socrates comes in, and he uses a Socratic dialogue instead to help them come to these conclusions themselves so that they can then leave for themselves. And they start leaving the cave as a result of the Socratic dialogues. But if you don't do that and you just try to tell them, they're going to beat you. They're going to try to kill you. They're going to attack anybody who tries to liberate them and call them crazy. So you have to learn to do it right, and you have to do it in a process. And this is why I'm such a big fan of Socratic dialogue, which we kind of did today. We didn't really do it perfectly, but.
All right. Where do we go off on Socratic dialogue? As someone who this is my first, no, where did we go off? This is my first Socratic.
There was a lot of questions. If we would have kept it kind of more one-sided, so I would have been the one asking the questions, you would have been the one telling the things, but you also are a question-oriented person, so that's good. So it was almost like a back and forth Socratic dialogue rather than a one person to the other. So I was going to do it to you, then you were going to do it to me. So you would give me your position, then I would ask you questions, and as it kind of went. Or we could flip it, and I was planning on flipping it. So then you would have me ask me, okay, so give me your position. I would give my position, and then you would ask me questions based on what I stated, and I would give small answers so that I could give you more opportunities to ask more questions.
Right. So it seems like we kept it more in like a conversation fashion.
Yeah. So we did have what's called still a dialectical discussion, which is very important. It's a dialogue. It's a strong sense critical thinking. So it wasn't Socratic per se, but there were a lot of questions and posed both directions, and it was a dialogue format that does produce growth. So it was still very beneficial. It just wasn't Socratic, so to speak. Socratic actually is really, really good with people that are more ignorant. So if I would go to Socratic classrooms are amazing. I love doing Socratic questioning in my classrooms because I do online classes from time to time. And doing Socratic discussions with people, when you're in an online debate with somebody that's really kind of confrontational or programmed, then you can just ask them little questions here or there and let them answer. And then you ask them a few more questions and let them answer. And after a little bit, their viewpoint softens at the very least.
All right. So I think your viewpoint in general, I can sum it up with one of my mom's old sayings. It's never right to do something wrong in order to get a chance to do something right.
Yes.
So because there's people getting stolen off of and being taxed, therefore we shouldn't have people who aren't contributing to this and not come over here. I feel like is okay. Yeah. Well, let's just focus on what's morally wrong instead of trying to violate somebody's rights based on something wrong happening to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Or something wrong happening to me. It's just happening to me. I'm being taxed. I get tons of money stolen from me.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of issues that we need to work on before we open up the borders back to where they were 100 years ago. I would be fine opening them up gradually again to back where that was and getting rid of the police state and that kind of thing. And I mean, actually, if you go to my video, A Voluntary Case for Closed Borders, and you look at my, there's a comment in there by a guy who was in Texas. His name's Maury Rothbeard instead of Rothbard is the commenter. And he actually talks about Texas and living on the border and why he's glad that there's borders to an extent because of raiders and stuff like that. And they still have raiding problems there on the border where they get raided. And they only have like one sheriff down there. And, you know, it's a very, very problematic for them.
Yeah. And while he's happy that he has borders because of that, I think it's also important for us to point out that the reason that these problems happen is because of what happens in these borders, because of the governments that create these border lines, because the fact that the U.S. government steals from everybody in the world through the petrodollar, because of the fact that they make laws that and promote the different gangs in Mexico, because it's the different laws that exist here that cause things to flourish in Mexico. It's the different laws in Mexico that cause things to flourish in Mexico. And it's these corporate entities that we know as governments that are causing this to happen.
Yes.
So while we are happy that there aren't people who are bandits from Mexico coming over and stealing.
No, but they're actually even still having this problem. They're having really bad lawless problems down there.
Right, because there's no such thing as closed borders anyways. Because there's no gate to close. It's a giant open piece of land.
Do you know why Texas became a state in the first place? One of the big issues, they were literally starting to beg to become a state because they were having so many problems with Mexico doing little raids on purpose and also having the Mexican governor or whoever he was causing issues and forcing people to immigrate to try to take back that area. And it was creating a lot of tensions. And they were just like, we want the U.S. military at the time to patrol the border and stop Mexico from encroaching on Texas anymore. And Mexico was actually systematically causing problems for Texans. And so that's why they joined the Union in the first place, because they needed help. And they didn't have the necessary means to protect themselves. Now, I mean, it's kind of like they gave away a little bit of sovereignty for that safety. But I'm just giving you the explanation of why it happened. And so it's a difficult issue, and we have to address those things before, because if you're going to get harassed by your southern border, by the government of your southern border, because you are a free people and they are still, totalitarian or authoritarian in some way, you're going to have to find, and that was happening in the 1800s.
All right. So I think the Texicans is a good example of rights to be in a certain place. So you say you have your right as an American to be here. You're born here. This is your right to be in America. Which in America you mean between the from the Mexican to Canada border, what we discussed earlier. You have that right. You don't mean corporate. You don't have a right to be inside a piece of paperwork, which America actually is.
Yeah.
You have the right to be in a piece of land that corporation violently claims to have control over. You have that right to be in that piece of land because you're born in America.
Yes.
And it's your birthright as your heritage. So my question to you is, who really has the right to be in Texas? Somebody whose family was there 600 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and historically has lived there, or somebody who violently came in there, put an imaginary line, said this is America, and now I have the right to be here. What person naturally has the right to be in that piece of land if you're, you know what I mean, if being on a piece of land is something that you naturally get from your ancestors?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that gets into the whole, you know, America shouldn't even be here now because of the Indian, you know, Native Americans and stuff like that. And so we took their land, therefore we don't have a right to land, therefore America shouldn't exist anymore, and there's no private property. Like, and that's kind of like the argument of the
Whoa, how'd you jump to no private property?
well, because we stole it all from the Native Americans. I'm saying that's the argument given to them. I'm not saying I have this argument. I'm saying that is the argument that many people use, especially on the left.
Right.
So, so that argument about Texas and Mexico is also that argument, I think, or is it not?
My question was, who has the right to live there? The person in Texas or the person whose ancestors were there for hundreds of years prior,
right,
before the imaginary line?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't. That was the question.
Well, but that's the same argument though as who has the right to live in, you know, Virginia or anywhere else, because, you know, the ancestors, the Native American ancestors who lived there, or the whites who colonized it, the British colonized it, right? I mean, that's the same argument, right? Am I getting this right?
Right. Yeah. Who has the right to live there?
Well, that's a difficult thing when you start looking at sovereignty. I mean, if a person is not sovereign and they're not taking their rights, and they're not staying within their rights, then you will somehow lose that to somebody else. I mean, it's like you piss it away in some ways. So I'm assuming that there was a pissing away of something by somebody, either because of their belief structures or their tribalism or whatever that was. Because again, we're here now, and I mean, you can look at why Texas became a state. They became a state because they were having very difficulty policing their own borders. And they weren't a state. They're a separate country until that point. They were friendly with the United States, but they were not, but they were hostile with Mexico.
Right. But before that,
there was a conflict between them.
They were Mexico.
Yes. Yes, they were.
Yeah. So the question was, who has the right to be there?
Mm-hmm.
People who it's been their land historically for hundreds and hundreds of years, or the people who put up the imaginary line and said, this is our land now?
Mm-hmm. Well, then you're basically saying that Americans have no rights to being born here also, and it's only Native American land, and we're trespassing.
I'm not saying that. I was asking a question. I asked a question. I didn't say anything.
No, but there is an implication.
That's not my stance. That's not my implication.
So what?
I'm not implying that. I'm asking a question. I'm not implying anything. I have a stance on it, of course. I have an answer, but it's not an implied question. I'm not saying the Mexicans have a right and you don't have a right to be here. I'm not saying the Mexicans have a right to be here and you don't. I'm not saying you have the right to be here and the Mexicans don't. I'm not taking either of those stances. I'm saying either people have the right to be wherever the hell they want.
Okay.
And if you're saying that your right is through your heritage of being born here, well, then if that's the case, the Mexicans have the right. I don't believe that. I don't take that stance. I don't think that I think your birthright, you being born in an area, gives you the right to be on planet Earth, and you can go wherever you want. The fact that somebody's Mexican or Russian or whatever else doesn't change that right, because your rights are natural. So the birthright idea is not, you don't get a birthright to be somewhere, and if you did, then it goes to the Indians and the Mexicans for sure. Doesn't go to you. You go, your birthright is back in England. Go back there and pack it out with all the other 300 million Americans.
Okay, well, let me look at that for a second. Okay, well, I would then again go back to that's not how we get there. We don't get
I agree that it's not, I'm talking about what's morally right. and what's morally wrong. And I think that we should be principled when we talk to people about what's morally right and what's morally wrong. And there's obviously things that are going wrong with immigration that is not right with the way that they're bombing people and forcing cultures on each other. I'm not here, and I wouldn't argue that that's right. And I don't think a one world government is morally right. So I'm not going to sit here and advocate for that. Open borders doesn't say that I want one world government. If someone thinks that that's what I'm saying, I would clearly object to them accusing me of saying that I want individualism, which is the exact opposite of a huge collective. But just because it's not the best way to get there, I don't think it's the there's too many people that get stuck in this false dichotomy of left and right.
Right.
And I think by telling them telling people half truths because there's other things that are going wrong, and if you just tell them that I'm open borders, they're going to go, what about welfare? What about this? What about that? That you should need to, and it's kind of like earlier in the thing I said, I don't really like calling myself an anarchist. I prefer voluntarist to a complete stranger, right? Why do I prefer that? Because if I say voluntarist, it's a very friendly word, and it's what anarchism is. Yeah. But if I say anarchist, people are thinking that I want to throw a Mazel cocktail at their house and burn their house.
Right.
So, but just because that's what people think, people have misconceptions. And just because I say open borders, somebody may have a misconception that I'm a liberal who wants to pay for everybody's welfare. Right. That's not the case. Okay.
Well, I think we need to be very clear about that then. Because, I mean, you look at like a lot of the, quote, ICE protests and stuff like that, they don't have any nuance at all. They're just like, we should just open it all up. I mean, it's like, whoa. And I've been called statist by people, voluntarists, anarcho-capitalists and stuff like that, by saying that's not the best route to make, to get there. We need to, there is also, we need to have some personal boundaries and start cleaning house first before this can become a reality. Plus our neighbors need to be cleared, the cartels and all that stuff need to be all cleared up, and we need to make sure there's not raiding parties coming, over and stuff like that, because we stopped, policing, and we need, and people also need to become responsible again and, unindoctrinate themselves.
Yeah, the fact is that the United States is going to collapse. You don't want it to collapse in the fashion that the people who are causing it to collapse want it to happen. You want it to collapse in a fashion where you're getting out of it by exchanging services with people that you know, and learning to grow your own food, and learning to get away from taxes. And you need there's going to be, they want to collapse the system and cause more slavery. And there's a way for us, as the system collapsed, to get out of it and to thrive as groups of individuals.
Yes, and I think that is actually could even be very close and very near.
Yeah, it could be, definitely.
And I think there's enough, but the problem is I think people need more nuance and more clarity, and to realize it's a very complex problem. And you're not saying this. I'm just saying that there's a lot of people out there that they want simple answers to complex problems. And it's not just a thing of open or closed borders. It is a very complex issue that needs to be, I mean, the morality of it is simple. I mean, I have rights, etc. But the complexity of the reality of the situation means you have to actually process from a point A to point B and go there in a gradual fashion, so that it's not this, a chaotic mess that, makes for the perfect environment for totalitarian, to consolidate power and, become a one world thing. So I just think we need nuance, and that's all I'm arguing for is nuance, and that the borders need to stay somewhat closed under the current thing, and then we can start gradually going back to as open as they used to be.
Well, eventually go to as open as they used to be before governments ever existed, not as open as they used to be a couple hundred years ago.
If we can have a place where a reality where we're no longer having raiding parties and, that kind of a thing, because people are all self-responsible enough to, take up arms and defend themselves and their property and that kind of a thing. And, they're not infighting among themselves, and sure. But
Yeah, and there's no need why we can't have that with the internet and the ideas being able to spread. There's no need for people to be afraid of other people like they've been throughout centuries.
but we need decentralization big time. We need decentralization, and decentralization does not mean chaos. But if there is decentralization happening on a mass scale, but there's centralized groups out there that are still going to try to take advantage of it, then that has to be factored in.
Yeah, talking about decentralization, I guess the Bitcoin debate is our next one. Are you a Bitcoin guy?
No.
No, okay, either am I. So never mind.
Yeah, I think that is a Trojan horse into centralization, especially with the trackability of the blockchain.
Exactly. And well, the thing is, it's already centralized too, with the Satoshi Nakamoto owning most of them. He owns like 9 million Bitcoin.
And nobody even knows who this guy is, right? Nobody really even knows who he is.
CIA, somebody.
Yeah.
So, but anyways, it's been a good talk.
Yeah.
I think it was productive.
Yeah. Feel free to put it on your website. I'm putting it on mine.
Oh yeah, I will. And any of your people on your website can come over and join my channel. I normally do interviews on the street and stuff like that, or I have a few conversations like this. It's Anarchistpost.
Yep.
One word.
Okay, I'll put that, all of your information in the link. Do you have a website or just?
No, I just have a YouTube channel right now.
Okay. Are you in the Philly area?
I am in Philly, or I'm in Central Jersey, but going to Philly today, so I'm close enough.
Okay, cool. Nice. You ever check out Mark Passio while you're out there?
No, I've heard of Mark Passio. I've watched some of his videos. Yeah, but if you know something he's doing in the area, I'd definitely be interested in hearing him at one of his things.
Yeah, he's a lot in Philly, but I don't actually follow him too much anymore. I listen to his videos and I've read some of his stuff, but I usually get it a few months late.
Yeah, he has some good stuff out there about rights, what your rights are.
Yeah. Cool. Well, by the way, what is your name?
David.
David. Okay. So good chat, David. And maybe we could have a conversation again sometime about something else that we're slightly differentiated in opinion on.
All right.
Because I don't think we're too far away on this. I think it's just, yeah, I think it's just kind of building a bridge.
Yeah, I think it's how we get there. I think we're pretty close to the same opinion on the violence at borders.
Yeah, and I think that there's we just need to start considering also the psychological effects and those kinds of things of our interactions and how they scale, which I didn't really get into, is the psychology of boundaries and stuff like that. But that might be a really good discussion, is how to practice anarchy in our homes. Because it starts here, and if we can't do it within our own family, then we're not going to be able to do it in a society, but it has to start in the family.
Yeah, and if you want to have a practical discussion, talk sometime, we can do that too. It doesn't have to be a debate where we disagree.
Yeah, well, Socratic dialogue works for all of it, and discussions just like this too. So,
all right, man. Well, thanks for having me on your channel.
Yep, and thanks for having me on yours.
Yep. We'll talk later.
Take care. If you enjoy